Well, Daniel Fiverson, many of us astrologers have usually used the July 4th, 1776 chart for the Declaration of Independence of the United States as a chart that influences us about the nature of this country, the United States of America. You've recently come across the chart for the United States or the Revolutionary's declaration of war with England. And you've constructed that chart. You probably found it from somebody else, I believe. Tell us what's motivating you to continue to study this chart.
Okay, that's a great lead-in. There's always been a lot of controversy about, and discussion, which is a better word than controversy, about which chart really is the true chart of the United States. And on July 4th, 1776, there are at least three major charts that are in circulation. There's the Sibley chart, which was created by an Englishman who received the news across the water. It's probably the most popular chart. I call that the consensus chart of the U.S. Then there's also a Gemini rising chart, which I've used for many years, which was suggested by Jeffrey Wolf Green. And again, it has great import. All these charts are important. And I don't want to make this more partisan than it already is, because I believe that the Sibley chart still holds a lot of merit. It still does work because that was an important day in American history. And any important event is going to hold that signature that will tell us, give us the energies and the dynamics at work. But history tells us something different. And the problem that exists with all the July 4th, 1776 charts is that none of them are historically correct. None of them are historically logical. Continental Congress did not meet in the middle of the night, so the Gemini rising chart at 2:30 a.m. is impossible. According to the minutes of the actual Continental Congress, which are available to be read, nothing happened in the morning of July 4th, 1776. So the Sibley chart is also inaccurate.
That's a chart for the afternoon.
All of those charts, there's no record in the Continental Congress records of anything actually happening on that day.
Right.
They discuss the declaration. But I have a totally different take, and I'll start at the beginning of the story. A couple of months ago, Ariel Gutman, who I think many of our listeners are familiar with, who's a friend of ours, contacted me. She was cleaning out her house here, and she had a lot of books she wanted to sell. She said, "Do you want to come over and see what I've got?" I said, "Sure." And I went over there, and I was going through her books, and I picked up a volume. It was called The True Chart of the United States. I said, "Ariel, tell me about this." She said, "Well, you know that I had collaborated at one time with Jim Lewis, who was the realizer of astrocartography, and he really felt that this book, this chart, was the true chart." And that was enough for me to get started with it. Two people whose astrological wisdom I highly respect are pointing me in this direction, so I followed it up. And over the past few months, I spent a considerable amount of time not only studying the chart for the psychological dynamics that are in it in terms of what our country's personality really looks like, but I've also matched it against a number of important events, 9/11, the Kennedy, Martin Luther King and John and Bobby Kennedy assassinations, a number of events like this, Dred Scott, Brown versus the Board of Ed. All of these events light up the chart, but nothing has lit it up as much, Merrylin, as this current impeachment process. The chart is absolutely on fire. So let me give out the data for the chart in case anybody has the capability to create the chart and would like to look at it themselves. This is for July the 6th, 1775, at 11 a.m. This is LMT, which would have been the time during the Revolution in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the chart comes up with a 0 degrees Libra rising. Why is this chart important? Where did this come from? According to the annals of the Continental Congress, on that day, Congress passed an act that declared that they were going to bear arms against Great Britain, raise a standing army, and a couple of days later they hired George Washington as the commander-in-chief. Why is this significant? There were battles, there were skirmishes before this. Well, the battles of Lexington and Concord, which occurred, were defensive skirmishes. They were defense. The colonists, the militia, was just defending themselves against an invading army coming into their village. It was on this day, on July the 6th, 1775, that they decided this was a declaration of war. And in effect, it severed all political and economic ties with the mother country, Great Britain, thereby default establishing the 13 colonies as a sovereign, independent, free state. From my perspective, what happened a year later is they survived.
For a year.
They survived for a year because
they still were fighting.
They were still fighting. Washington's army did not starve to death or freeze to death in that winter in New Jersey, and they came back and they reached a point where they were actually victorious. And they announced to the world on the 4th of July, 1776, that they were a free and independent state. It was their first birthday. That's why the chart works. But so as an example, Merrylin, what's going on today? I have the chart here for January the 12th, 2020, which is the upcoming major great conjunction between Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. And in this chart, we have a number of exact aspects to this chart which are absolutely remarkable. If we were going to look at the U.S. chart from a mundane perspective, which it's a mundane chart, obviously, if we're going to look at it from the perspective of what's happening with our country, we would look to the 10th house and its ruler as representing the leader of our country, as the president. We would also look at the Sun and Saturn as figures of authority. Well, in this chart, the first thing that we have is transiting Pluto is at 20 degrees of Capricorn. The U.S. moon in this chart is at 20 degrees of Libra. That's an exact square. Okay. Transiting Saturn is exactly opposite the U.S. chart the U.S. sun in this chart at 14 degrees. Actually, it's at 14 degrees today. I'm looking at two different charts. I have today's chart and I have the chart for next January. But Saturn is exactly opposite of the sun. Pluto is also trining the U.S. Neptune. It's exact. And Chiron is also exact opposite the U.S. Saturn. So we have all these major, this number of exact, wouldn't you agree that this number of exact aspects to these planets, which are so specific, correlating to the presidency and to the, to the authority and the government of this country to be remarkable, Merrylin, would you not?
Well, I haven't studied the chart to say that. I mean, one of the things that just struck me from what you just said, though, is it certainly is a chart that points to the issues of war, especially with the Chiron opposite Saturn, Mars. I'm not sure. You've given me overlays of charts, and so I'm not sure which one is which.
Right.
But anyhow. Anyway, we're not going to take the time, actually, at this point to go through that. So you've been looking at this from a research perspective, and what other things do you see in here that indicate what's going on in the country right now is triggering a lot in that chart? Can you talk a little bit more to that?
Sure. Well, let's start with Pluto and the moon. Okay. So if the moon in the chart, being the ruler of the 10th house, which has Cancer on the cusp of the 10th house in the natal chart, the moon literally would represent the leader, would represent the king or the president or whoever the leading authority figure is. Pluto is squaring it. It's tremendous pressure, and this is a last quarter square. This is a crisis in consciousness, if you would. This is a crisis in, everybody is like astounded. We turn on the news and we listen to the events, and it's out of scope of normal reality. It seems to have crossed all the borderlines of what a normal experience should be in terms of how our government should be, what a president should be. It's so, but what this represents is tremendous power struggle. We're seeing these emotional swings. We're seeing this tremendous struggle for really who's in control. This is what's going on, and it's also a tremendous pressure on the presidency itself. We could look at it, this is what's happening to Donald Trump, but it's what's happening to the office of the presidency itself, regardless of who is sitting in the White House. The whole presidency itself, again, from my perspective, and this is, just take this as personal opinion, the presidency has been under shadow for decades. And this, to me, is like the final straw. It couldn't get any worse. When they killed John, we all were appalled.
JFK.
Yeah, JFK. All of us were in terrible mourning. But okay, so it happened to Lincoln, and said this is part of our history. But unfortunately, the last 40 or 50 years have just been a succession of events which have fed into this same pattern. And
so you're seeing those events correlating to this chart.
The three people who could have been president of the United States over the past 40 years were all removed from, they weren't removed because there were machinations behind the scenes of the Democratic Party. They were removed with a bullet. And, this is, I'm sorry, I can't ignore this. I see this stuff going on, and I see the thread through all of it. And now we have Donald Trump.
So using the bullet would be like a Mars thing. What role does Mars play in this chart that correlates to maybe transits today?
Well, Mars is right on the ascendant in this chart in the 12th house. It's hidden, okay, and it's conjunct Neptune. So, this is such a tremendous potential for machinations and behind the scenes, cover-ups and, false flag operations, and that's exactly what that is. But Mars, Saturn on the ascendant, we meet the world with our authority. We meet the world with our military. We meet the world with this. But it's Libra. Okay, we come across, okay, I'm there and I want to help you and I'm your friend and all that. But it's 0 degrees of Libra rising in the chart, Venus. So there's all this vanity and this jealousy. All of the shadow of Venus is also inherent in our personality. It's always about us. All of our military alliances, all of our economic alliances are to our benefit. We have used every country in the world, somehow to benefit the American economy, the American political system. I hate to sound,
Well, the Neptune though makes it kind of illusory.
It makes it deceptive, is what it makes it.
Right, exactly. It's interesting in terms of the correlations today of how many Americans are completely in step with and accepting of what Trump says is happening when, he's doing this grand projection thing.
Right.
He's pretending like what he's saying is true when it's fake, and then there's hopefully more than half of us, because you can't go by the percentages of voters because they are not the majority of Americans who are eligible to vote. It's less than the majority. And if only everybody were voting, we'd probably have a different dynamic going on.
Well, that's the issue. That's the real issue. Even if he only has 30 or 40% support, that 30 or 40% is committed. The 60 or 70% is not committed. It's not a committed group, not a committed majority, which has been the problem. This is the cyclic, disease of our culture. This complacency and this somebody else is going to fix me. Somebody else is going to take care of it. I don't have to vote. or I don't like anybody who's running, or I've got my own problems. My mother is dying, and my husband's got cancer, and my children can't get into college, and you know how it goes. People have their own stuff in their face, especially with Uranus in Taurus. People are hunkered down in their own stuff. They don't see anything else in the world to a great degree, except the rare few who are waking up. And
Uranus in this particular chart is also in Taurus, right?
Yes, and again, it's exactly in conjunct Saturn. Exact.
And what does that mean?
What that means is we're seeing a president who is acting out his individuality to a degree that nobody can imagine. We're seeing someone who was being so individuated and so unique and so himself that it's totally unpalatable.
Okay, but you're representing this chart as representative of the country, just as we've talked about the Sibley chart for the 4th of July in 1776.
Right.
And yet, this is a president unlike practically every president that we've had.
True.
And we've had some crooked presidents. We've had some presidents that have done some things under the table, et cetera. That's not surprising.
That's U.S. politics.
And it's not surprising that there are a lot of euphemisms and white lies and sometimes gross lies done by any number of presidents.
Right.
But never have we had a president who is so blatantly overt about all of that.
Such blatant lawlessness.
And so what you just said, you're applying to this president, but really does it apply to all the presidents?
No, but all of these archetypes, these dynamics have light and shadow, and unfortunately now we're seeing the shadow. That Chiron in the 7th house could also be the role model for the rest of the world, but it's not right now. So it works both ways.
All right. Well, Daniel, we're listening to this during our fundraising show, and so we're running out of time. If you want to sum up the message about this that you'd like to leave our listeners?
I wish I could offer everybody, some solace here, because I am in the same, boat with all of you, and we're paddling as hard as we can to stay afloat. We just have to keep paddling. What we have to do is we have to pay attention, we have to wake up, and when the time comes, we have to act. We can no longer take the inaction choice. That's no longer an option. We cannot sit back and be spectators anymore. That time has passed. The consequences are much too great. We cannot expect Donald Trump to do what Richard Nixon or Bill Clinton did faced with these same circumstances.
Well, wait a minute. Both of those men did different things.
Right. But both of them did things legally and with acquiescence.
I see where you're
But there
going.
will be no legality. There will be no acquiescence.
Many people feel like even if this president is impeached and then voted out of office by the Senate with the Supreme Court justice in charge, overruling that hearing, that people have said they doubt that he'll even leave the White House.
The best thing that I have seen over the past couple of weeks is how he has angered the military, and that's my last best hope, that when it comes down to the short strokes, he will not have the military.
Oh, yeah. That whole thing with the military just reminds me of how I'm thinking, does he perhaps really want us to be engaged actively in a war that involves Turkey and Syria and Russia, and consequently be able to claim powers that he really doesn't have?
That question keeps me up at night.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Daniel. Once again, Daniel Fiverson, astrologer here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for your insights. And we'll go back to asking you, our listeners, for your support.